Welcome everyone to this video about Oscar Wilde's play, The Importance of Being Earnest. And the main aim of this video is to go through the main plot points of Act 1. And to do this, I'm going to use a very simple timeline in order to show you the chronology of the first act of this comedy of manners play from 1895. The video will also finish with a selection of significant or key quotes from the act, which you might want to engage with in some way. And even though this video is aimed at students that are completing their A-level in English literature, for example, the Aspects of Comedy course with AQA, this video would be useful for anyone of any age studying any qualification who wants to understand what is actually going on in Act 1 of this play. So this is the very simple timeline graphic that I'm going to be using for this video. And as I progress through the video, the plot is going to appear in a chronological way from the beginning of the act, of course, to the end. So the way the play begins and the way the play opens is essentially with Lane and Algy discussing marriage, music, and you've also got that comic detail that the servants drank champagne, which is unusual because servants as a lower status character, you would expect them to drink lower status alcohol, such as ale or beer. So champagne is often, usually of course, reserved for expensive palates, but that's not the case here because in the topsy-turvy world of The Importance of Being Earnest, not everything is as it seems. And it's in this opening duologue, I suppose, which is a conversation between two people, that we reveal that marriage, in terms of Algy's perspective, isn't a great thing. He doesn't want to get married. He doesn't want to settle down. He effectively wants to live this perpetual bachelor lifestyle forever, rather inconsequentially. Act 1, of course, also takes place, I should say, in the 1890s in Algy's apartment in London. The next significant thing that happens in the scene is Jack enters Algy's apartment, and it's very quickly established, as you would expect from a comedy, that there's a love interest here. So comedy is often about characters pursuing a love interest for potential marriage, and in this play it's not marriage necessarily that is entertaining, but it's how the characters get there. So it's the journey to get to their love interest. So Jack enters, and we learn that there's a love interest very quickly between Jack and Gwendolen. It's also in this opening conversation that the important symbol of the cigarette case is revealed. And it's that cigarette case that acts as a catalyst to let us know, as the audience, that, again, not everything is as it seems. And because Jack's name is different to the name of Earnest, which is inscribed in the cigarette case, that brings about the question, well, what is Jack's actual name then? And it's revealed, of course, Jack has to come clean, despite trying to lie to begin with, that he's actually called Jack, and Earnest is in effect a fake name that he uses to live a life of pleasure, rejecting his societal obligations in the country. So that cigarette case is relatively important. And as we know, or as you may know, Jack and Algy are parallel in the fact that they have both invented somebody in order to escape and live a life of pleasure. So Jack reveals that he has a brother called Earnest. Of course, he doesn't really. So he can neglect his duties in the country, including his duty to Cecily, and go down to the city to live a life of excess and pleasure. Algy, on the other hand, has invented, in his words, a invalid friend called Bunbury, which enables him to escape the excesses of the city and go into the country and reject societal obligations that way. So both of these men have a parallel in the sense of their identity, and they are both deceiving when they see fit. And of course, a lot of the time with comedy, deception and the confusion that causes can often be highly entertaining for the audience to watch. And of course, because Algy's fictional invalid friend is called Bunbury, that gives you the verb bunburying, which is essentially a word that describes the act of taking on a false disguise. And one of the things that I always say to students when I teach them is that catfishing, which is actually quite a modern term, at least in the internet sense, is actually a form of bunburying. So we've always had people that have lied about who they are. And of course, it's much easier to do so now online. The next significant entrance is that of Lady Bracknell, who is the archetypal comic villain, or the battle axe character, should we say, and also Gwendolen, her daughter. And they enter Alger's house. And very quickly, Lady Bracknell is offered cucumber sandwiches, of which there are none, because Alger's eaten them all. And they have a discussion about her dinner plans. And of course, Lady Bracknell is supposed to be exactly the kind of character that Wilde is satirising in this play, this kind of pretentious, snobbish, stuck-up woman who is supposed to be a socialite, but who actually is quite tactless. So one of the things that she says, even though we know by this point that Bunbury is a fake person, that he should decide whether he lives or dies because the shilly-shallying is absurd between life or death. That is quite an absurd thing to say, because people rarely choose whether they live or die or not, and presumably they would always choose to live. So again, to say that in a very deadpan manner comes across as very ridiculous, but also far removed from the caring nature as a dinner party host that you would expect. With Algy and Lady Bracknell going into the next room to sort out the music for Lady Bracknell's party or dinner, of which Algy has made an excuse that he can't go because Bunbury is ill. Of course, that's very convenient, a convenient dramatic device for him to escape that. That leaves Jack and Gwendolen alone. And of course, it's important that they're left alone because it enables Jack to attempt, at least to begin with, to propose to Gwendolen. And it's from that proposal and the conversation of their courtship that it's revealed that Gwendolen has always had this fascination with the name Earnest. Earnest, of course, is a homonym. It sounds exactly the same as the Earnest that is spelt with the A, meaning sensible, respectable, serious, which were regarded as archetypal Victorian strengths during this time of the 19th century. So Gwendolen is revealed as relatively shallow because she believes that's the best thing in a relationship is the name of your spouse. And of course, that's not the case. At the moment at which the proposal is kind of agreed upon, of which is a little bit messed up because of the order of the way it's done. Importantly, Oscar Wilde gets his comic villain Lady Bracknell to come back on stage. And that's important because it stops that moment of unity and romantic idealism between Gwendolen and Jack, and forces Jack to get up on his feet again and face Lady Bracknell. Gwendolen, of course, is dismissed and told to wait in the carriage. So Lady Bracknell, in keeping with her comic villain stock character, splits physically the couple apart, but you could also argue emotionally as well. Comically, Jack has to face a relatively strict or scathing interrogation of himself by Lady Bracknell, and it's in that interrogation that he's almost interviewed about which side of the street he lives on, whether he smokes or not, how much money he has in available to him, how much land his property have. It's interesting to say that the first question she asks is, do you smoke? There are other important things to ask somebody when you're meeting them, particularly a son-in-law for the first time, such as do they have a good moral character? Whether they smoke or not could be regarded as a trivial detail even today. And it's from that interrogation which brings about the climax of the scene, really, which is the big intrigue and question as to Jack's heritage and his past, because it's revealed that he was found in a handbag at a railway station, meaning that he was probably, according to Lady Bracknell at least, the result of a social indiscretion, meaning that he was born out of wedlock, maybe, he was an orphan, and therefore you don't really know how much money he has or what his bloodline is. And as I have said in another video for Earnest, it's interesting that Wilde kind of foregrounds this idea of bloodlines through a railway line instead of an actual parental bloodline. And it's from this that Lady Bracknell refuses to permit the marriage to take place because she is not satisfied with the big question mark over his past. And it appears at this point that the bloom is off the rose, and the wedding and the proposal and even the thoughts of matrimony was all a waste of time. So as an audience, we kind of go, how is Jack going to get out of this one? What's he going to do to find out who he actually is? And the play finishes with Jack and Algy back on stage discussing their evening plans. It's in this conversation that Jack says, is Gwen going to grow up like her mother, this Gorgon, which is like a Medusa figure with the snake hair, when she's older. And towards the end of the scene, Gwendolen comes back into the stage to obtain Jack's country address, which Algy secretly writes on his cuff. In order for Gwen to do that, of course, she's had to disobey her mother. So she's doing things almost rebelliously. And it's important that Algy writes the address on his shirt cuff, because that's what enables him to then go up to the country, which is, of course, where Act 2 and Act 3 take place. Because at least he begins as Bunburying. He's going up to the country to Bunbury, to use that word from earlier. So that is the timeline of Act 1. And of course, it's also worth saying that despite Jack and Algy lying and deceiving whenever they see fit, and both being really figures of deception in that sense, as an audience, we like these characters. We kind of like this scoundrel-like behaviour simply because it's entertaining to watch, because these disguises add complications to the comedy, which can therefore create a sense of confusion or chaos or disequilibrium, which is highly entertaining to watch as these characters tangle themselves and tie themselves in knots. So that is Act 1 if we look at the chronological timeline. Like I said at the beginning, this video is ending with a series of key quotes from the play, at least key quotes that I think are significant. And again, all of these quotes really are far too long to put in an essay. I would not expect students to write these out in their totality, but I would expect students to be picking at these quotes a bit like a chicken in order to pick out the words and the phrases that are most important from these shapes. So these are spoken by a variety of characters, and I would argue that these are quite important. Some of these quotes, of course, are to do with disguise. It's the men revealing their alias or their fake person, a brother Earnest or an invalid Bunbury, and just explaining to us what's going on. And of course, it's important that Jack and Algy explain to the audience and to each other that they're both got these kind of dual identities, really, and these other people that they can fall back on, because from that point on, the audience knows exactly what they're doing. So whenever Bunbury or brother Earnest is mentioned later, we know with dramatic irony that it's all a lot of nonsense and a lot of deceit. There's also some quotes here to do with this idea of facade. So I don't play accurately, but I play with wonderful expression, of course, is spoken by Algy right at the very beginning of the scene or the act where he's playing the piano. And of course, if you're going to be playing a piano accurately and correctly, you're going to have to be accurate. It's not enough to play an instrument with expression. So again, it's this idea of challenging artifice and challenging facade, and basically rendering these characters without any substance whatsoever. So these key quotes might be helpful to you if you were ever wanting to think about knowing some of the phrasing of the first act. So hopefully that was useful for you in terms of that simple timeline. But what I've done there is I've put the chronology of Act 1 into 9 relatively simple points, so you can chart what's happening and also the significance of them to the wider play. Thanks for watching, and good luck in your studies.